Could you imagine? Game consoles. Oh man, do I adore these things. Just these boxes and whatever else you'd call these things with one core purpose. Playing video games. And oh man, do these consoles boast libraries of incredible games. These days, I'm usually pretty set with just either playing the PS5 for multiplats and PS4 games, and the Switch for all the Nintendo stuff. But who am I kidding? I still love fiddling around with the Wii, Xbox 360, N64, and the handhelds. It's just so fun revisiting these consoles from my childhood and the past I wasn't there to experience. Despite not really getting into gaming until 2020, I have a ton of passion for a ton of consoles, and I feel like I played enough games to have 26 opinions. Consoles like the Game Gear, Atari Lynx, and Jaguar, I've dabbled in their libraries, but I haven't actually found any games I like. And stuff like the PS Vita, Virtual Boy, Sega Master System, Saturn, and Dreamcast, I just have flat out no experience with. But these are more niche consoles, one I doubt anyone will go,
"You don't have a favorite Virtual Boy game?"
But in case anyone is like that, Wario Land looks okay. Obviously, we have to start with the console to popularize home console gaming, the Atari 2600. And this is such an awkward console. So much of its library is just incredibly limited arcade ports, but there is one arcade port that I believe is perfect. Missile Command. Missile Command is simple. You have 6 cities and a bunch of missiles. Enemy fire rains down from the sky, and your goal is to blow them up midair before they can hit the cities, while using as little ammo as possible. Finishing every round and hearing your extra ammo and standing cities add up to your points counter is so satisfying. And even when you fail, you're still treated to the classic Atari explosion. Damn! An incredibly simple game, but it transitions to the 2600 perfectly and is forever my favorite to go back to. Now I have a lot less experience with Atari's second console, the 5200, but a lot of its arcade ports are better, and some older Atari games also made their way here with some enhancements, such as Star Raiders. Released originally for the Atari 400 and 800 computers, it received an Atari 2600 version that was beyond limited. Star Raiders needed a lot more control than just a stick and a button, so the 2600 version released in this fat ass box so they can include the video touchpad, which allowed you to actually play the game in the worst way possible. But with the 5200's phone controller, it feels like this was made for Star Raiders. Star Raiders on 5200 just feels so good. It's a simple space game, just fly around to different sectors of space, blowing up enemies while also tending to your systems. It's quite simple, but I think that's what makes it great. It doesn't bite off more than it can chew. It works perfectly on these older consoles, and even all these decades later, it's still fun to revisit. Now we're talking the NES, a console I hate. Well, I'm definitely going to Nintendo hell. Better go sooner than later. Okay, I'm being a bit too harsh. I like the NES, but I'm not afraid to admit it's one of the hardest Nintendo consoles for me to go back to. This is where most of Nintendo's beloved franchises were born, and I respect these games, but I also feel that they have a major case of first entry syndrome, where the first entry in a beloved series is an absolute chore to go back to. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, I have a hard time going back to their first games, but Mario got a whole trilogy on NES, and one of those is definitely my favorite. Super Mario Bros. 3 is absolutely immaculate and a flat-out good game. It refined the general gameplay from 1 and set the standard for all 2D Mario platforms to come. Super Mario Bros. 2 is my favorite. One of the black sheep of the mainline Mario series, Mario 2 is a weird game, wholly because it wasn't originally Mario 2, but I find its differences from the rest of the series make it so much more interesting, and it still feels so fun to revisit, from the graphics to the music to the gameplay. I still think objectively Mario 3 is better, but from a personal enjoyment standpoint, I prefer Mario 2. The Atari 7800 is a very awkward console. This console was released during the reign of the NES and failed to gain any traction, so it really fell under the radar. Years ago I wanted to dive deeper into this console's library, so I looked up the best games for it, and the top result was Ninja Golf. I thought with the name as crazy as that, the game has got to be fucking ridiculous, so I looked it up on eBay, and okay, it's one of those. Well, it's a good thing I have $200. I can afford to burn one. And spend the other on Ninja Golf. Oh, damn it! Well, I was only able to salvage $30 of it, but I used that to buy Atari 50, the Anniversary Collection, a collection of Atari games from across all of their systems. And I'll never forget looking at all the games included.
Oh, I'm set.
Finally, I can play ninja golf, and yes, it kicks ass. So as the name suggests, you're a ninja playing golf. Try to hit the ball in the hole and as few hits as possible. But in between the hits, as you walk to your ball, you have to fight enemies, and when you're near the hole, you fight a dragon. It's such a ridiculous game, but such a fun one at the same time. It hasn't aged fantastically, but it has such a fun concept that was perfectly executed and definitely sticks out compared to the rest of the 7800 library. The one and only Sega console I'll be talking about. The Genesis seems to have a solid library I still have yet to really dabble in. I don't know why, but I don't have much experience in the Genesis library, and I don't necessarily have a huge lust to change that, but I do have a favorite game here, and shockingly, it's not Sonic 2. How do you think Sega reacted to that?
That son of a bitch. Was releasing it on Switch 4 times not enough?
My favorite Genesis game is Castlevania Bloodlines. A Castlevania game I've always thought was just okay. No, it's better than okay, it's good. But compared to Super Castlevania 4 and Symphony of the Night, it just simply gets lost in the shuffle. Comparing it to the rest of the Castlevania lineage, it doesn't stick out. Now compared to the rest of the Genesis library, oh my gosh, a Castlevania game? This is a great classic Castlevania. Just simple whip cracking.
Or spear thrusting. Depending on how you swing.
Action across, well, this time all of Europe. The game has a great sense of variety with its locations and gives Castlevania that signature Sega Genesis twang. Overall, not a standout title in its series, but a standout on the console. The Game Boy, the little console that revolutionized portable gaming while still being ass at the same time. Considering that Link's Awakening DX is my favorite game of all time, one may assume the Game Boy original is my favorite on that console. Wrong again! I like the Game Boy, but it's a bit hard to revisit. Games like Super Mario Land 2 are good, no doubt, but just feel like Game Boy-fied Mario platformers. Again, still good, but I think I'd rather play Tetris in the corner alone.
What is wrong with me?
Tetris isn't a very exciting game, at least this Game Boy version, but it's iconic. This popularized both the Game Boy and the Tetris brand itself, and it still holds up as a great version of Tetris, at least on what it is. So yeah, as weird as it is to say, Tetris is my favorite Game Boy game. Donkey Kong 94! Donkey Kong 94! With a game called Donkey Kong released on the original Game Boy, you'd assume it's just a Game Boy port of the arcade original. And it starts as that, but then it turns into this big old puzzle platformer with dozens of levels. This game laid the groundwork for not just the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series, but it also introduced various moves that would become staples of Mario's 3D moveset. It's an incredible title that's still a blast to revisit, regardless of the fact that it's for this clunky ass block from '89.
This game's giving the eulogy at my funeral.
Oh my gosh, the Super Nintendo is my favorite retro console. It took the concepts of the series introduced on the NES and fully realized them. I'd say the biggest upgrade from NES to SNES was Metroid. Go back to the NES original and it's hard to stomach, but give Super Metroid a go and you're playing an incredible title that defined this type of 2D platformer. Now, with me saying that, you'd assume I'm building a Super Metroid being my favorite Super Nintendo game.
A Link to the Past wins.
While not as big as a jump from Metroid to Super Metroid, it was still a huge jump for Zelda. Zelda 1 was basic and feels oddly empty these days. I think it fits the story well enough, sure, but what I'm trying to say is that A Link to the Past is actually good. From the story, to the gameplay, to its art style, the dungeons actually feel distinct and have puzzles, the story actually has stakes, the world actually feels alive with not just life that wants to kill you, but life that wants to help you on your epic quest. This game set the template that the rest of the Zelda series has followed quite closely, which I don't blame because this template is goddamn flawless. Overall, a sublime experience from a sublime generation of retro gaming. In this era, Nintendo and many other companies were pushing their franchises into the third dimension. And while Castlevania did this as well on the Nintendo 64, on the PlayStation it proved that the dimension didn't need to change for Castlevania to change for the best. Symphony of the Night embraced a more non-linear style, somewhat similar to Simon's Quest, but unlike Simon's Quest, Symphony of the Night is super akin to Metroid. This style fits Castlevania so well, it's definitely my favorite style for Castlevania, and Symphony of the Night was a great first go at the style. This game set the formula of the following 2D Castlevania games would follow, and for a first go at this style, this absolutely knocks it out of the park. It keeps the series' hard-as-nails styles while evolving it in such an incredible way. It's definitely not the easiest to go back to, mainly because when you die you go all the way back to the menu, but besides those little annoyances, this game is just incredible and proved that some series just work better when they stay in 2D. Oh man, the Nintendo 64, where many franchises entered 3D, and in general, so many incredible games were released for this console. Mario 64, F-Zero X, Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye 007, Ocarina of Time. I adore so many games with this console, but my favorite will always be Majora's Mask. Oh my gosh, man, the story, the dungeons, the world, the characters, the music, the masks, it all just gives a sense of...
This game is the fucking best.
Majora's Mask is such a special game, one of those games I feel that everyone needs to experience. The way it grabs you, it makes you feel for these jumbles of polygons. In many ways, I feel that the Zelda series still has yet to meet the depth of the storytelling in this game. There may only be 4 dungeons, but I think these are all sublime. The different forms Link can take allow for so much gameplay variety, and the core gameplay builds off the incredible groundwork Ocarina of Time laid. What a special game. I'm so glad there was never a remaster that took away more than it added.
Yeah, glad that never happened.
My favorite Game Boy Color game would just so happen to be my favorite game of all time, a remaster of a Game Boy game, Link's Awakening DX. Yep, specifically the DX version, not the original, not the Nintendo Switch remake, no, the Game Boy Color re-release that added color. My gosh man, everything about the game. The story, the dungeons, the music, the characters, usually this stuff is par for the course with Zelda games, but for a Zelda game originally made for the original Game Boy, it's so impressive what they were able to do with it. The Switch remake really doesn't feel out of place in any ways, at least to me. I may just be blind because this is my favorite game of all time, but who cares because it's my favorite game of all time. The Nintendo Switch version is definitely objectively better, but this version will always be my favorite.
You see, that's something we like to call being wrong.
The PlayStation 2 definitely had some incredible games that I haven't played yet. However, that doesn't change my favorite PS2 game being Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, I've been playing a ton of online in the recent Battlefront Classics collection, and man, this game is just so fun. It recreates the feeling of being in these massive Star Wars battles so well. The presentation is spot on, from the visuals to the music to the sound effects. It really makes it feel like you are a soldier on the battlefront. There's so many maps and modes. It's such a good game that I can play whenever without having to really get invested into it. Such a sublime game, and dare I say, the Battlefront Classics collection isn't bad on Switch. Oh my god, this is Switch gameplay when I'm talking about my favorite PS2 game? Much like the PS2, I still have yet to really dig into this console's exclusives, but there is one I have delved my way into a bit, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. An RPG set in my favorite film franchise, what isn't there to love? I still have a lot of the game to make it through, but what I've played so far has been a blast. I know I've been saying this a lot, but the characters, man, I just love them. The combat isn't really my thing, but I can tolerate it to experience the story and explore these locations from the Star Wars galaxy. One of my favorite handhelds, man. The Game Boy Advance had, well, a lot of Super Nintendo ports, but also some sublime original games, with my favorite being my other favorite game of all time, Mother 3. Finally, after years of development hell, the Mother trilogy was finally finished on the Game Boy Advance, and Mother 3 was a really special game to end it with. Par for the course, but the story, world, characters, all of it is just so well done here. It juggles the lighter comedic tone and the darker tone so well. I'll never forget playing it for the first time and hitting the major plot twist in Chapter 1, and just being absolutely shocked and torn by it. And yet, so many moments had me smiling. It's crazy the grip this game has on you emotionally. And even though this is an RPG, I adore the gameplay. The combat is made addictive with the rhythm battle mechanics and the rolling health meter, alongside its music and visuals. It's one of the most engaging RPGs I've played and makes me adore a genre I could usually just tolerate. All of it culminates into a game that is just so goddamn special, and unfortunately, it's still stuck in Japan.
Now, how have I played it, you ask? Irrelevant.
The GameCube, yet another sublime console that isn't easy to pick a game from, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Super Mario Sunshine. This is a pretty divisive game, mainly due to its difficulty, which many don't like. And while I do understand, I really enjoy this game's difficulty. Mario feels so incredibly smooth here, so much better than in 64 and even better than he did in Galaxy. As a matter of fact, Mario didn't feel this good to control again until Odyssey, and since Mario feels so good to control, anytime I'd fail in Sunshine, it felt like it was my fault, like I should have just played better. This made it so when I'd finally get a shine I've been working on for 10 minutes, I'd have the sense of I finally triumphed this challenge instead of I finally got through the clunkiness. So I don't mind the difficulty, which just means it's up for here for me. The theming, man, I love the island theme. Flood is so damn cool, allowing for so much creative platforming. The music, the world, what I've been saying forever, just once again applied here. The DS had some solid first-party support, but its third-party support was also incredible. And my favorite DS game is Dragon Quest IX: Sentinels of the Starry Sky. All of that stuff I value in a game is here and in full force, but beyond that, the customization to your character, the monster designs, and just the nostalgia of this guy. I spent so much time just playing through the main quest and just also doing random side quests, and while it doesn't have super engaging RPG gameplay, the personalization of this game definitely makes it up for me. I care about Joe so much. He takes heavy hits and deals heavier hits. Sarah is also a pretty heavy hitter, especially when her tension is raised. And Scott, well, he's always been the weak one, but he's that one kid that doesn't really add much. There's not much to him, but you still love him regardless. Just by me explaining my crew, you should be able to tell I have such a connection to these guys, and I really care for them. I've worked so hard to make them all such powerhouses, and they can tackle anything. It just makes this game that's already great even better for me. While the Xbox 360 definitely had some great exclusives, I'm all about the multi-plats when it comes to this console. And so my favorite Xbox 360 game is either Red Dead Redemption or Batman Arkham City. Red Dead Redemption, man, my favorite Rockstar Games game in general. Just a big old love letter to classic spaghetti westerns. Pretty much the open world sandbox style of Grand Theft Auto set in the Old West. As always, the story, characters, the world, all big attributes to why I absolutely love this game. But like, especially so, man. I mean, this is one of my favorite stories in the entire medium. Just everything is incredible here. And the gameplay, well, it's a Rockstar Games game, but I love how Rockstar Games games play, so I'm a fan of it. While I like it more than Batman Arkham City, don't count it out, because I'm gonna say it's my favorite PS3 game. Much like many other consoles, I haven't experienced many of the exclusives on the PS3. The one I played the most is Uncharted 1. And while it's a good game, I see it more as a good starting off point, a solid foundation for the following 3 inches to build on. Cause man, this guy can feel rough at times. So, Batman Arkham City, one of my favorite superhero games. It took things Asylum founded and grew on them, creating an open world city Batman game. And it's exactly what I wanted from a Batman game like this. Just going around the city stopping various villains from Batman's rogue gallery. And while that is still how it was in Asylum, I find it so much more fun to explore the city than just the Asylum Islands. So yeah, Arkham City is my favorite PS3 game. This footage is from the Switch port.
Don't you dare act like you could tell.
Almost 3 years ago, I said Super Mario Galaxy is pretty good. And since then, I may have 100%ed it as both Mario and Luigi. And let me just say, I was so wrong. Super Mario Galaxy is not pretty good. Super Mario Galaxy is fucking incredible. Oh my gosh, man. In so many ways, this is the peak of Mario. Exploring the cosmos in this space odyssey with such an incredible presentation to it all. It's not easy going back to the Wii original with its crusty resolution, but man, play the version in 3D All-Stars and it's so good. However, I'm glad I've dabbled in the Wii version because it's made me so much more tolerant of this game's controls. As I said when talking about Sunshine, Galaxy is a lot more restricted, and I wasn't a fan of that until I played the Wii release. It feels really good on a Wii remote and nunchuck. It feels like the controls were tailor-made for these controllers, and they were. Super Mario Galaxy is just incredible, and I was wrong back then. Why?
Maybe I should have played through the whole game before I came up with an opinion on it.
Talk about another game it seems like I'm hypocritical about, Super Mario 3D Land, which I refer to as my least favorite 3D Mario game. But hey, this is a Castlevania Bloodline situation. When compared to the rest of the series, it doesn't stick out. When compared to the 3DS library, it takes the cake. 3D Land is an excellent game, and an excellent Mario one. There's so many fun levels, mechanics, ideas. It's a really fun and well-made game, and while I don't really think it compares to the rest of the 3D Mario games, that in no way means it's a bad game. It's just different and great in its own ways. And as a linear 3D Mario platformer on the 3DS, or just in general, it's an absolute gem. My favorite Wii U game is, oh look at that, it's another linear 3D Mario platformer. There's no getting around it. 3D World is the Wii U's original 3D Mario experience, really doesn't paint it in the best light. It just can't possibly compare to what came before and after. But when you add it to a lineup that consists of a bunch of excellent 2D and 3D platformers, 3D World kicks ass. This game has so much personality. It's so vibrant and colorful and gorgeous. It's pretty much a home console take on the concept of 3D Land, which is in no way a bad thing. And while, like I said, it doesn't really compare to most of the other 3D Mario games, when it's standing alongside them instead of against them, it's an incredibly strong game. And the Switch version also had Bowser's Fury included. How can this not be incredible? It's so hard to not pick Multiplats as my favorite games for these consoles, but goddamn, Red Dead Redemption 2. While I prefer the first one,
As I said, I'm a goddamn moron.
Red Dead 2 is an absolute gem. As always, the story, the world, and characters are incredible, and while I preferred it in the first one, it's still excellent here. It's awesome to see the days of the Van der Linde gang depicted, seeing the events that John only mentioned in passing play out. It adds so much depth to one while also standing on its own as an absolutely sublime story. The gameplay is where the game starts to lose me. It's still good, but the realism is a bit too much for me. I appreciate some of the efforts, but it just gets obnoxious to always have to clean your guns because they're not doing damage anymore, and ride your horse across the map for 5 minutes during a mission while characters talk about nothing. But at the end of the day, those are small nitpicks of a giant incredible game, so who really cares?
Do I have to?
The Xbox One is like COVID. I've never had it, and I'm cool with keeping it that way. But I still feel like I have to pick a game, so Grand Theft Auto 5, sure. Still really good Grand Theft Auto. While not the best in this series, I still quite like what I usually like in my favorite games. And the missions are all a blast. So many GTA games have missions that I just absolutely dread. And while GTA 5 definitely has some, they're not as frequent as they are in other entries of the series. The gunplay is a blast, the driving is a blast. Just a really good game I adore that just so happens to be on a console I have zero experience with. Mario Odyssey was my favorite Switch game until May 12th, 2023. Tears of the Kingdom. Man, it may just be Breath of the Wild 2, but it's Breath of the Wild 2. What it adds is so much fun, man. The depths, vehicle creation, fusing, it's all so much fun. And on top of that, there's also a shit ton of new shrines, quests, landmarks, the works. It's not the most unique Zelda game, but there's so much new to it alongside a really solid storyline. And man, the build up to release for this game, I can't see anything else ever topping it. This generation of gaming has been kinda lame so far, but at least Sony put out a great exclusive, Spider-Man 2. And man, I already thought Spider-Man on PS4 was great, but I hadn't seen anything yet. The gameplay here, my lord! Traversing the city is so much fun. The web wings in combination with the rest of the new abilities makes traversal so much fun, and also so goddamn fast. It's crazy going back to the first one and seeing how sluggish it feels, cause it really didn't feel that way here, but now it does. And the story. It took a while for me to get fully on board, but once the last act hit, I was all in and thought it was incredible. Overall, it's a really great time. From a distance, it seems like it could run on the PS4 perfectly fine, but just swing around a bit and you'll see. It's not a generation-defining title, but it's still an incredible game to call the PlayStation 5 its home. Much like the Xbox One, I don't have either of these systems, and with many of its exclusives going to other systems, there doesn't seem like much of a reason to do so. The series exclusive I want to play the most is definitely Hi-Fi Rush. This gives me GameCube and Wii vibes and looks like an absolute blast, so if you're depending on me having a favorite series game, well, that's probably a good guess.
Whew. And that is my favorite game on every console.
It's been a blast recounting my favorite games from every console, and from this, you can definitely tell what my favorite game series are, including Donkey Kong, 6 of them were Mario games, 4 were Zelda games, 2 were Castlevania games, 2 were Red Dead games, out of 3 games in that series, but you could also tell I like a variety of different games. Grand Theft Auto 5 and Donkey Kong are on completely different sides of the table. Mario 2 and Arkham City, Castlevania Bloodlines and Spider-Man 2. I can like games of any kind.
Especially really good ones.